When Ryan told her to pack her things, Emily didn't cry. The words cut through the quiet air of their living room like a blade. But she just stood there, frozen, holding the edge of her shawl with trembling fingers. He wouldn't even look at her. The man she had loved for 7 years stared at the floor, his jaw tight, his voice cold. "I can't do this anymore," he said. "I deserve a real family, a wife who can give me a child." The clock on the wall ticked once, twice. Before Emily spoke, her voice came out soft, almost pleading. "Ryan, we can still try. The doctor said there's—" He interrupted sharply. "Enough, Emily. I'm tired of trying. I'm tired of hoping for something that will never happen." His words echoed in the room like thunder after a long drought. She wanted to tell him that she understood his pain, that she had cried herself to sleep more nights than she could count, praying for a miracle that never came. But what good were words now? He'd already made up his mind. So she folded her clothes quietly. Each sound, the rustle of fabric, the click of the suitcase latch, felt like another nail sealing the coffin of their marriage. When she reached the doorway, she turned to look at him one last time. He didn't turn around. Outside, the evening air smelled of rain. Emily stood beneath the gray sky, her suitcase beside her, feeling the first drops fall onto her face. It was strange, how something so soft could feel like a punishment. That was the night she lost everything. Her husband, her home, and the life she had built around the dream of a child that never came. Before all of that, before the silence, before the bitterness, Emily and Ryan had been happy. They met in the most ordinary way, at a small bookstore near the town square. She was searching for a gardening magazine, and he accidentally handed her a travel guide instead. They laughed about it, and he offered to buy her coffee next door. That was how it started, a simple conversation that turned into a love story. Ryan was charming, ambitious, the kind of man who made everyone feel at ease. Emily was quiet, kind, and loved small things. Cooking for two, reading under the window light, tending to her small balcony garden. Together, they created a home filled with laughter, books, and Sunday pancakes. For a while, they believed they had everything. But after 4 years of marriage, that belief began to crack. It started subtly, a question at a family dinner, a lingering glance from Ryan's mother, a sigh when someone mentioned children. "When will we hear good news, dear?" his mother would say, her tone light but pointed. Emily would smile politely and answer, "We're trying." Trying. That word became the rhythm of their life. Doctor appointments, herbal teas, countless tests. Every month brought new hope and then disappointment. Emily learned to keep her tears silent, crying only when Ryan had fallen asleep. He used to comfort her, wrapping his arms around her, whispering, "We'll get through this together." But over time, his voice lost its warmth. He began staying late at work, stopped joining her for dinner. The laughter that once filled their home turned into long stretches of silence. One evening, she cooked his favorite, rosemary chicken and mashed potatoes. She waited, watching the candles flicker on the table. He was 2 hours late. When he finally walked in, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable, she stood up with a smile. "I kept dinner warm for you," she said gently. He looked at the table and sighed. "Ah, you didn't have to go through all that trouble." "It's your favorite," she said, trying to sound cheerful. But he didn't sit. He took a glass of water instead, drank it quickly, and muttered, "I'm not really hungry." That was the first night she truly felt the distance between them. It wasn't just his absence at dinner, it was the emptiness in his eyes. When he went upstairs, she sat down alone and ate in silence. The rosemary tasted bitter that night. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in their home thickened. Emily tried to keep busy, rearranging furniture, baking bread, tending to her plants. Anything to distract herself from the growing coldness in her husband's voice. One afternoon, she found him sitting on the couch, staring at a small envelope. "What's that?" she asked softly. He folded it quickly. "Just work stuff." But something in his tone made her uneasy. That evening, as she cleaned the living room, she noticed the envelope tucked under a magazine. Her heart pounded as she read the letterhead. A fertility clinic. Her name wasn't listed anywhere on the form, only his. That was the first time she realized Ryan had gone to a doctor alone. She confronted him gently the next morning. "Ryan, why didn't you tell me you went to the clinic?" He didn't look up from his phone. "Because I knew what they'd say." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "They said, 'I'm fine, Emily.'" His tone sharpened, every word slicing deeper. "Which means the problem isn't me." She froze. He stood up, finally meeting her eyes. "You've made me wait for years. I can't live like this anymore." He left the room before she could respond, leaving her surrounded by the echo of those words. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Cold, final. From that day on, the house felt different. He barely spoke to her unless it was necessary. He started spending weekends with friends, and sometimes didn't come home at all. Emily pretended not to notice the cologne that wasn't hers on his shirts, or the unfamiliar perfume that lingered on his coat. She told herself it was stress, not betrayal, because the truth would hurt too much to admit. Every night she prayed, not for a child anymore, but for her marriage to survive. But prayers, sometimes, are met with silence. And one evening, under that heavy, quiet rain, her silence ended. When Ryan told her to leave, he didn't shout, he didn't even sound angry, just tired. As if she were a burden he'd carried too long. And Emily, brave, broken, and still gentle, walked away. Emily didn't have a plan when she left, just a suitcase, a small purse of savings, and the dull ache of humiliation pressing against her chest. The streets looked different that night, colder, emptier, as if the world itself had turned its back on her. The rain had stopped, but puddles glistened under the streetlights like broken glass. She caught her reflection in one, tired eyes, damp hair, a woman she barely recognized. She found a small room to rent in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The landlady, Mrs. Whitmore, was kind, the kind of woman who noticed pain without asking about it. "You can stay as long as you need," she said softly, pressing a cup of tea into Emily's hands. That first night, Emily sat on the small bed, listening to the distant hum of traffic. The air smelled faintly of old paint and jasmine from the window. She opened her phone. No messages, no missed calls. For 7 years, Ryan had been her home, and now home was just a stranger's room with peeling wallpaper. She didn't cry. She just stared at the ceiling until sleep finally found her. Days passed slowly. Mornings began with the whistling kettle, ending with silence. Emily found work at a local bakery. The pay was modest, but it gave her purpose. The scent of bread and sugar filled her days, and the warmth of the ovens became her quiet therapy. At first, she avoided talking about her past. When customers smiled and asked, "Are you new in town?" she simply nodded and said, "Yes, just starting over." The phrase "starting over" became her armor. Simple, harmless, final. Mrs. Whitmore would sometimes join her for tea in the evenings, sharing old stories about her late husband and the small joys that time can't take away. "Pain changes us, but it doesn't have to ruin us," she once told Emily. She smiled at that. It was the first time in weeks she had smiled at all. Months slipped by. Seasons changed. Winter came with its gray mornings and long, lonely nights. But Emily had begun to heal, slowly, quietly, like a flower finding sunlight after a storm. She stopped checking Ryan's social media, stopped wondering if he missed her. And one morning while pouring coffee at the bakery, she realized something startling. She hadn't thought about him for days. Freedom, she realized, wasn't a loud celebration. It was silence, peaceful, still, and kind. But peace rarely stays untested. One afternoon, as she was arranging pastries by the window, she heard a familiar laugh outside. It was soft, low, unmistakable. Ryan's. Her heart skipped. She turned, and there he was, across the street, holding another woman's hand. The woman was younger, dressed elegantly, and clearly pregnant. Her hand rested on her rounded belly, and Ryan looked at her with the kind of adoration Emily hadn't seen in years. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. It felt as though someone had pulled the floor out from under her. They looked happy. She lowered her gaze quickly, stepping away from the window. Her coworker, noticing her pale face, asked, "Are you okay?" She forced a smile. Just a little dizzy. But inside, she was crumbling. That night, alone in her room, she allowed herself to cry. Not out of jealousy, but from the final realization that Ryan had truly moved on, that he had found everything she couldn't give him. The pain was sharp, but it also brought a strange kind of closure. He had chosen his path, and she would choose hers. Spring arrived with warm sunlight and blooming lilacs. Emily's life began to quietly fill with color again. She had become a favorite among bakery customers, known for her gentle smile and perfectly frosted cakes. One day, a woman from the local community center came in. She said, "We're hosting a cooking workshop next month. Would you like to help teach?" Emily hesitated. She'd never thought of herself as a teacher, but something inside her whispered yes. And so she did. The first class was small, just 5 women and a few curious teenagers, but as she showed them how to knead dough, measure sugar, and trust the slow patience of baking, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Then one morning, nearly a year after her divorce, Emily received unexpected news. It was Mrs. Whitmore who told her first, with that cautious tone people use when delivering something heavy. "Emily," she began, setting down the newspaper, "you remember your ex-husband, don't you?" Emily's stomach tightened. "Yes. Why?" Mrs. Whitmore turned the paper toward her. "His wife just gave birth. The baby... there were complications." The room seemed to go still. Emily read the small headline, a local article about Ryan and his new wife, Jessica. It mentioned their newborn son, who was in critical condition. For a moment, she just stared at the words. Her throat went dry. "I see," she whispered. Mrs. Whitmore watched her carefully. "I'm sorry, dear. I didn't mean to upset you." Emily shook her head. "No, it's all right." She folded the newspaper neatly and placed it aside. Then she sat in silence for a long time, her hands resting on her lap. It wasn't satisfaction she felt, not revenge, just an aching sense of the universe setting itself right. That evening, Emily took a walk through the small park near her home. The air smelled of wet grass and distant rain. She watched children playing, their laughter echoing through the fading light. And for the first time in a long while, she whispered a quiet prayer, not for Ryan's pain, not for her own, but for peace, for all of them. Because she finally understood something. Life has its own way of balancing the scales. The news spread through town faster than wildfire. Ryan's baby was born with a rare heart defect. The doctors said the child would need multiple surgeries, maybe even a transplant. People whispered it everywhere, in grocery stores, at the barbers, in hushed tones during Sunday service. Emily didn't join in. She kept her head down, her hands busy kneading dough at the bakery, but the words still found her. "Poor thing. They say the baby's been in the ICU since birth." Another chimed in. "That new wife of his looks so worn out already. Such a tragedy." Emily's heart clenched. She didn't wish suffering on anyone, not even Ryan. But the irony was hard to ignore. He had once called her incomplete. Now life had shown him that perfection doesn't exist. Not in people, not in families. A few weeks later, Emily was locking up the bakery when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Emily." She froze. The sound of that voice was like a ghost stepping out of the past. When she turned, Ryan stood there, thinner, pale, dark circles under his eyes. The confident man she had once loved looked hollow, worn down by sleepless nights and heavy burdens. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the faint hum of the streetlight and the distant barking of a dog. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "What are you doing here?" He exhaled, rubbing his face. I didn't know who else to talk to." She hesitated. Part of her wanted to walk away, to protect the peace she had built so carefully. But something in his voice stopped her. "All right," she said quietly. "Let's talk." They sat on the bench outside the bakery. Ryan's hands trembled as he spoke. "Jessica's been at the hospital for weeks. The baby, he's so small, Em, so fragile. Every night I keep thinking, maybe this is punishment for what I did to you." Emily looked at him, really looked at him. The pride, the arrogance, all gone. What sat before her was a man broken by life in the same way he had once broken her. "You don't need to call it punishment," she said softly. "Life doesn't work like that." He shook his head. "But it feels like it does. I was cruel to you. I blamed you for something that wasn't your fault. I thought having a child would fix everything, that it would make me feel whole again." His eyes filled with tears, but Emily stayed calm. "I'm sorry you're going through that," she whispered. For a long moment, they sat in silence. The years between them seemed to collapse into that quiet. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know, I see now what I did. I see the kind of woman you were. I should have stood by you." Emily nodded slowly. "Maybe," she said gently, "but what's done is done, Ryan. You can't go back. You can only be better from here." He looked at her then, as if seeing her for the first time. There was no bitterness in her eyes, only peace. And that perhaps hurt him more than anger ever could. When he stood to leave, she didn't stop him. He walked away quietly, shoulder slumped, disappearing into the dark. That night, Emily sat by her window, the moonlight spilling across the floor. She thought about how strange life could be, how everything comes full circle in its own time. Once, she had prayed for Ryan to understand her pain. Now, he did, but it didn't bring her joy. It brought understanding, the kind that softens the heart instead of hardening it. Weeks passed. Ryan didn't return, but Emily occasionally heard from others that the baby was still fighting for life. Each night, she prayed quietly for the child, lighting a small candle by her window. Then, one afternoon, a small envelope arrived at the bakery, no return address. Inside was a simple note, written in Ryan's familiar handwriting. "Our son passed away yesterday. I don't have the strength to face anyone, but I wanted you to know you were the only person who showed me kindness when I deserved none. I will carry that for the rest of my life." Emily stood there for a long time, the note trembling in her hands. Tears blurred her vision, not for him, even for the life that had ended too soon, but for the quiet tragedy of human choices. Sometimes life teaches through loss, and sometimes it whispers lessons we only hear after everything else is gone. That evening, she closed the bakery early and walked to the church at the edge of town. It was empty, quiet, and smelled faintly of candles and old wood. She knelt at the front pew, clasping her hands together. "God," she whispered, "thank you for giving me peace and the strength to forgive." She sat there for a while, letting the stillness wrap around her like a blanket. When she finally left, the sun was setting, soft orange light spilling across the sky. Outside, children laughed, birds called to each other, and life went on, just as it always does. Emily smiled faintly. She wasn't the same woman who once begged to be loved. She was stronger, freer, whole in her own quiet way. Because she finally understood, karma wasn't about revenge, it was about balance, and in that balance she had found herself again. Time has a gentle way of softening even the deepest wounds. Months passed since Ryan's letter. The pain it carried had faded into something quieter, not gone, but transformed. Like a scar that no longer hurt when touched, only reminded her of where she had been. Emily's days settled into a steady rhythm, mornings at the bakery, afternoons helping at the community center, evenings spent reading by the window. The small things, the hum of the oven, the laughter of customers, the smell of cinnamon and sugar became the quiet background music of her healing. Mrs. Whitmore often said, "You've bloomed again, my dear." And, in a way, she had. She no longer looked over her shoulder for the past, no longer waited for anyone to fill her life. She had learned that peace wasn't something someone could give her. It was something she had to build one day at a time. One Sunday morning, the community center was hosting a small fundraiser for the children's ward at the hospital. Emily volunteered to help organize it. She baked dozens of pastries, each one carefully shaped and dusted with sugar, her hands moving with both purpose and tenderness. The event was full of warmth. A man approached her. He looked to be in his mid-30s, tall, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. He smiled. "Excuse me," he said, holding up one of the pastries. "Did you make these?" Emily nodded. "I did." "Well," he chuckled, "they might be the best thing I've tasted all week." She laughed softly. "That's a dangerous compliment. I might start expecting you here every morning." He smiled. "Maybe you should." His name was Daniel, a pediatric nurse from the same hospital where the fundraiser donations were headed. He had lost his wife years earlier, but carried himself with quiet strength, the kind that comes from surviving pain and still choosing kindness. They talked for hours that day, long after the event ended. It wasn't romantic at first. It was something gentler, steadier. Two people who had known heartbreak but didn't let it harden them. Over the months, Daniel became a quiet presence in Emily's life. He'd stop by the bakery in the mornings, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with flowers from the hospital garden. They'd talk about work, about life, about how both of them had learned to live again. One day, as they walked through the park, Daniel said softly, "You know, I used to think that pain ruined people, but you've made me realize it can also shape them into something stronger." Emily smiled, the breeze lifting strands of her hair. "Pain teaches us what love really means. It's not always about having everything we want. Sometimes it's about finding peace with what we have." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes gentle. "You're remarkable, Emily." She blushed slightly, shaking her head. "No, just still learning." That spring, Emily was asked to host her own baking class at the community center, the same place where, months earlier, she'd helped out as a volunteer. When she stood before the class, a group of women, teenagers, and even a few men, she felt something powerful, confidence. She shared her recipes, yes, but also small lessons about patience, resilience, and the art of starting over. "The dough doesn't always rise right away," she told them, smiling. "Sometimes you just have to give it time and warmth. People are the same." Her words weren't just about baking. Everyone knew it. And when the class ended, a woman came up to her with tears in her eyes. "Your story, it gave me hope," she said. Emily smiled softly. "Then I think it was worth everything I went through." That night, as she walked home under a silver moon, Emily thought of Ryan for the first time in months, not with anger, not even with sorrow, but with understanding. He had been a chapter in her life, one that had to end so she could begin again. She wished him peace, wherever he was, because she finally realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about freeing yourself from the weight of bitterness. Later that year, the bakery expanded. Mrs. Whitmore passed her the keys one morning with a proud smile. "You've got the hands and the heart for this place," she said. "It's time it became yours." Emily was speechless. She held the keys in her trembling hand, not just to a shop, but to her own future. And on the day the sign went up, Emily's Hearth Bakery, she stood outside, her apron dusted with flour, her eyes glistening. People from all over the town came to celebrate. Daniel was there too, helping her hang balloons. When the crowd had thinned and the evening light turned golden, he turned to her and said, "You built this from nothing, Emily." She smiled softly. "Not from nothing, from pain. And pain can be a good foundation if you let it teach you." That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Emily locked up the bakery and stood outside for a moment, breathing in the quiet. A year ago, she had walked away from her home with nothing but heartbreak. Now, she had peace. The journey hadn't been easy. It had been lonely, painful, uncertain. But every tear, every silent night, every small act of courage had led her here. She looked up at the fading sky and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to life itself. Because she finally understood that sometimes what feels like the end is only the beginning in disguise. The bakery was thriving. Children ran in after school, laughing as Emily handed out little sugar cookies. Old couples sat by the window, sipping tea and sharing stories. It wasn't just a shop anymore. It was a place filled with warmth, comfort, and second chances. One morning, as she was arranging pastries in the window, a familiar voice broke through the hum of the street. "Emily?" She froze. Slowly, she turned. Ryan stood a few steps away, holding a small child by the hand, a man maybe 2 or 3 years old. His face looked different, thinner, older, tired. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. Then Ryan said softly, "It's been a long time." Emily nodded. "Yes, it has." He glanced around the bakery, his eyes taking in every detail. You did all this?" She smiled gently. "Yes, I did." The little boy tugged at his sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, I'm hungry." Emily's expression softened. She knelt down and handed the child a cookie from the tray. "Here you go, sweetheart." The boy grinned, crumbs sticking to his lips. "Thank you." Ryan watched quietly, something heavy flickering in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or longing for the life he had thrown away. He said, "I heard about your bakery. I wanted to see it myself." Emily met his gaze, calm and steady. "I'm glad you did. It's been a good life." He nodded, his voice catching slightly. "You look happy, Emily. Truly happy." "I am," she said simply. For a moment, it seemed like he wanted to say more, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain, but the words stayed trapped in his throat. So instead, he just whispered, "Take care of yourself." And she smiled. "You too, Ryan." As he walked away with his son, Emily felt something loosen inside her, the last knot of the past, untying itself. There was no anger left, no bitterness, only understanding. Because life had already taken care of justice. Ryan had gotten what he wanted, a child, but not peace. And Emily, she had found what she truly needed, herself. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Emily sat by the window of her bakery, watching the street lamps flicker to life. Daniel soon arrived, carrying a small box of flowers for her counter. He set them down gently and smiled. "Busy day?" "Just another day," she said softly, "but a good one." He looked at her with quiet affection. "You've come a long way, Emily." I nodded. "Yes, and I think I'm finally where I was meant to be." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of laughter, the laughter of the same little boy who had just left. And instead of sadness, Emily felt warmth, because she understood something deep, something life had taught her the hard way. Sometimes what breaks us isn't meant to destroy us. It's meant to build us into who we were always meant to become. Your worth is not defined by the love you lose, but by the life you have the courage to build afterward. True strength is finding your light after the darkness. If this story inspired you, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support means everything. Let us know in the comments what you took away from Emily's journey.